We've made hundreds of crossovers over the years, but we want this to be our best one yet. Something that's a little different from the rest of them. From Kerbelina, Millennia in Tekken, to Blythe in Hades, what really makes a crossover good? So one of these crossovers is definitely better than the other. This is because one is convincing, and the other, well... So before knowing what character we want to use for a crossover, it's important to properly understand the aesthetics of the game. Elden Ring is a mix of dark fantasy, gothic elements, and medieval themes. You have gloom, questionable creatures, and decay. Now, what video game character would work well with this from another fantasy universe? None other than Yuumi from League of Legends. Just kidding, for today we're going to be working with Jin. So Jin is all about precision, beauty and death, and conflict. He doesn't outright have the same themes as Elden Ring, but neither does Robin if they just threw him into Mortal Kombat like Kratos. He definitely would look out of place too. So how can Jin be redesigned to fit into Elden Ring's world? This is where we looked back at our research on Elden Ring aesthetics to reference from. It's important he is of course recognizable and fits the context. When looking at other characters that share some similarities in terms of design and colors, it seems that Caelid would suit Jin best, a region that is all about storytelling through its tragedy. Where he could take the role as someone who once served alongside the Redmane Knights, but fell into madness after the battle between Radahn and Millennia, becoming infected with rot. But then, what does Jin's obsession with performance and art have to do with knighthood? This is exactly why he would be perfect as a bard. So, a bard in the medieval era was a poet-singer who recites tales and were often employed by patrons. So, for our concept art, we want to imagine Radahn being Jin's patron. And after the tragic events in Caelid, he lost his audience and now hallucinates imagining the cave that he fled to as a grand theatre. As we continued putting the pieces together, we found that this concept is quite similar to another character from a game called Simone in Nier Automata. She also has an obsession with beauty and art, to the point of madness, which parallels with Jin's twisted mind. In Elden Ring's decayed, rotting world, Jin would serve as a mad artist, driven by his pursuit of perfection, in a world falling apart around him, trapped in an endless cycle of rehearsing for a performance that will or won't ever come. So, by establishing this, we now have a very solid foundation. And this is something that every character needs, whether being a crossover or not. Foundation allows you to build upon ideas, avoiding confusion as you go along, or creating any contradictions within your design. This allows us to move into the ideation phase. We began by collecting visual references from both League of Legends and Elden Ring to create a balance between influence. This was to avoid the challenge of making Jin feel like a natural part of the Elden Ring world, while maintaining his identity. So here you can see that on the left we have some references from Elden Ring, and on the right we have some medieval references. When creating a mood board, every visual should have some reasoning behind it to avoid as much clutter as possible. This video is not sponsored, but Milanote is a great tool for arranging mood boards that look great, and it allows you to put notes and arrows in your references like we've done here. In our early sketches, we explored the semi-realistic art style of Elden Ring. The manga really helped in reference, where you can see the use of hatching and a watercolor-like feel to the style. Here was also the chance to do some outfit exploration, looking back at the mood board to see the types of clothes. We also played around with a bit of his poncho and mask, which varies between being defined and a bit more simplistic. The mechanical arm was something we kept basic, as it was important to just establish the direction taken for this design at first. Eventually, upon some evaluation, these attributes circled in red were chosen for the final idea. So we mix them together for the next stage, which is the coloring. Here we considered both Jin's palette and the Redmane Knight palette, which is almost identical, so it was really easy to mix them into one concise palette. Now for arguably one of the most important parts of Jin's design, his mask. We did 2 iterations and one final. The first was a bit more complex, with some design influences by common designs seen in Elden Ring armor. And the second was inspired by the Venetian masks, that have the same theatrical themes, and these floral-like patterns. The final was a mix of some parts from the original and the other 2. We noticed that every Redmane Knight has a Radahn emblem on the top of their helms, so this was incorporated into the final design. With the concept locked in, we moved into the production phase. Elden Ring's art style is incredibly textured and detailed, with every piece of armor and clothing telling a story. We knew that capturing this was essential for making Jin feel like he belonged in the world. From his mask to the torn edges of his once elegant robes, each detail had to reflect the years of decay and madness. So for this, we did a quick material render of his clothes and his arm. This was just to save some time on debating what materials would look best for the final render, as it would be a lot darker and harder to play around with. One of the biggest challenges we faced was adapting Jin's weaponry. His guns are central to his identity in League of Legends, but they don't fit into Elden Ring's medieval setting. We decided to focus on his lotus traps and rot butterflies, transforming them into tools of artful death. Instead of using bullets, Jin would command 4 swarms of butterflies to trigger his traps, and then these traps would be intricately arranged onto his stage, waiting for the Tarnish to step onto one of them as a final act. As we were working through this, the concept art went through multiple revisions, constantly being benchmarked against the other concept art for the game. The problem we realized here is that he looked far too polished and clean for his story as well as the overall style of the game. So the final revision would add some edge and decay in a way that could communicate his design well. So, is this the ultimate Elden Ring crossover? You let us know what you think.